Hello everyone and welcome to Almost Autumn. I know autumn doesn't start until the end of the month, but I have already started diving into my flannels and all of my autumnal music, and that is what we are going to be talking about today. I did this kind of video for spring and then for summer, so we are just continuing the tradition, and I'm going to be recommending to you some albums that I think are perfect for autumn. I think autumn might be the most elusive season in terms of categorization generally. For spring you kind of have blooming, and for summer you have kind of this liveliness and this stickiness, and I think autumn can be tough to pin down. I had a short list of 30 albums that I have whittled down to 15 for this video, and I think what I realized is the thing that links all of them is this particular brand of melancholy. I kind of have 4 sections of albums for this video. First I have country and folk, then I have some emo, then I have back to school kids, and then finally nighttime. But yeah, I think the thing that kind of links all these together regardless of genre is that autumn is a time for melancholy, so let's get into these albums. Starting with the folk and country stuff, up first we have The Glow Part 2 by The Microphones, which is an indie folk, psychedelic folk album. This album is incredibly lo-fi. It kind of feels like the forest trees are gonna come and consume you, but you're really happy about it, you want to be haunted by the trees. I find this to be a particularly late autumn album. It kind of feels like once a lot of the leaves have already fallen off the trees and are kind of surrounded by the skeletons of things that were once living. But I also do find that once you start feeling the chill of the season, you can listen to The Glow Part 2. I think this is a lot noisier and more chaotic than a lot of traditional indie folk. I mean, those are kind of the psychedelic elements playing on it. And for this video, I kind of want to recommend a song from each album, so if what I'm talking about sounds interesting to you, you can go check out the one song and know if you want to check out that album. So for this album, I think you should check out I Want Wind to Blow. I think it might be the first song on the album, and I think it just kind of encapsulates everything that this album does so well. Moving on, we have Two Hands by Big Thief, and this is an indie folk, indie rock album. The day I'm filming this, by the way, a new single for them came out for their next album, and I'm kind of in a Big Thief phase right now. The first note I wrote for this album is, the breeze has settled and Adrienne Lenker inhabits it. She is the vocalist and I think one of the main lyricists for Big Thief, and this album, ooh, it just feels like the autumnal chill. This album is very bittersweet, it is very earthy, it feels very warm-toned in kind of intense ways. Each of Big Thief's 4 main albums so far has kind of had a very different feeling. I think some of their bigger songs are a lot dreamier, things from Capacity, like Mythological Beauty or Mary, but this album really does go to very punchy, intense places, and I think that's why it feels so good for autumn, because I think autumn can be kind of an intense season. To me, this is their most intense album and also their most complex, and Buck Meek, the guitarist, kind of shreds at points in this album when you're not even really expecting it. So yeah, I just think it's awesome, and if you want to check out a song from this, the biggest song is not, but I think Forgotten Eyes kind of edges that one out for me, so I really cannot recommend this enough. Up next we have Magnolia Electric Company by Magnolia Electric Company. This is an alt-country rock album, and Magnolia Electric Company are the same people as Songs Ohia, if you've heard or listened to Songs Ohia. This is just a delicious blend of a lot of genres I associate with autumn, like folk and rock and Americana and slowcore. The first track on this, Farewell Transmission, might be the single song that I associate most with fall, because it has this twang but also this darkness. It kind of meshes. It's just that song encapsulates the perfect blending of genres that a lot of this album kind of has going for it. Jason Molina's vocal performance on this is astounding. I mean, he's good in every single thing I've ever heard him do, all the Songs Ohia albums, which I feel also might be good for kind of late autumn, early winter, like Ghost Tropic, but we'll get to that when I do my winter video. There are a few duds on this album. It kind of has 4 amazing songs at the beginning, then a few duds, and then it closes with this song, Hold On Magnolia, which means a lot to me now that I live in the South and I've actually seen magnolias bloom. So yeah, this is just a very good, twangy folk rock slowcore album. I couldn't have a video about autumnal music without mentioning Neil Young, who I think is very, very fall to me. And probably the album that most people would associate with fall is Harvest, but I don't love that album as much as the one I'm gonna talk about, which is After the Gold Rush. This is a folk rock, country rock singer-songwriter album that I think is more piano-focused than a lot of his other music, so it gives it this very rich tone while still having Neil Young's traditionally folky country vocals. It feels very somber. This one also feels like it would be a very good autumn into winter album, I think because of those kind of darker piano is an instrument I really associate with winter. I don't know why, I don't know if any of you relate to that, but like I think because of that instrumentation it feels like it would be a very good November album. My favorite song in this is the title track, After the Gold Rush. I think that song is just like stunning and heartbreaking all over, so go check that out if you like Neil Young, haven't heard this album, can't recommend it enough. I think the lighting may have just changed because the sun just went behind a cloud, which is a perfect time to talk about my next album, Wrecking Ball by Emmylou. This is an alt-country dream pop album that has very folky, dreamy foundations, but with Emmylou Harris's kind of like country, not like twangy, but just like there's a little hint of country in her vocal performance that gives it obviously that alt-country tag. Some of the lyrics on here are just like hauntingly poetic, and I do feel like this album gets quite dark at times. It feels kind of haunting. Some of the beats kind of feel almost foreboding, not quite scary, but just like a little bit of that, you know, October chill, maybe, if you will. I think a lot of dream pop people see as like hazy and ethereal, and I don't quite think that's the case because this still is very grounded and earthy, but it is dreamy. It kind of is that nice mix of like, it's not, some dream pop is up in the clouds. This dream pop is down on the ground. My personal favorite song in this album is Where Will I Be, but if you're curious about those more like darker tones on this album, I think All My Tears is a perfect place for you to start. My final album from this category is one I listened to for the first time very recently, and that is Hejira by Joni Mitchell. This is a singer-songwriter folk album with a lot of jazz fusion, jazz pop elements. The guitar licks kind of feel like the wind along the sand of a desert, in this very, again, earthy way. I think another thing about autumnal albums is they have to feel of the earth, probably because of the harvest and the changing leaves, and this kind of has those like warm desert tones, but Joni's vocal performance gives it like this jewel-toned accoutrement. I just think the blending of genres here works so well, and I think some of Joni's other earlier albums are very simple, kind of a woman and a guitar and just like incredible songwriting, and I think with this album she expands on that with those more jazz and like jazz elements and more instrumentation, and it's just like so good. I think this is one of the softer, more crisp albums on this list, because again, for some reason, a lot of the ones I chose just feel very like, not noisy or chaotic, but just feel like they have a lot of elements to kind of represent I don't know, the leaves, the earth, but this one is, I think, on the softer side. I haven't had a ton of time with any of the songs on this, but my two favorites on it so far are the title track Hejira and the song called Amelia, and they're both absolutely stunning. Next, let's talk about some emo. I want to first mention an honorable mention that I know a lot of people associate with fall, and that is American Football's first album, their first self-titled. I do associate this with fall. Nevermeant is one of the best like summer into fall tracks. I just don't adore this album anymore. It doesn't quite make it into my top 15 or whatever, but I did have to mention that because I know a lot of people think of that album when they think about fall. But for my picks, first an album I've been obsessed with lately, and that is Cardinal by Pinegrove. This is an indie rock, alt-country, Midwest emo album that I wrote in my notes. It sounds like a bunch of like indie rock kids got together to make kind of like a more twangy album, and then I found out that they actually did record it in like one of their mother's basements, so it kind of does have like a jammy, friends making music feeling to it. Kind of a common thread of these three albums is that they're about love and connections and heartbreak, and this one, just as much as the other two, is about that. Some of the lyrics on this are just absolutely devastating, which is exactly what you want from emo music, so like it does what you want it to do, what it says on the tin. The songs sound like a lot of fun, but then they hurt a lot when you actually like listen to the lyrics, and that is true about my favorite song on the album, New Friends, which is both hopeful and depressing all at once, and it is just so good. Next we have not only one of my favorite emo albums, one of my favorite autumnal albums, but just one of my favorite albums full stop, and that is Left and Leaving by the Weakerthans. This is another album that technically is indie rock and alt-country and Midwest emo, but I think if Pinegrove has a little bit more of the country, I think Left and Leaving has a little bit more of the emo to it. This is an album fundamentally about who leaves and who's left. It is exactly what the title says. They're about love and about heartbreak and about the lives that we share with people, and also about like past lives and hometown. A lot of this is about like the guys from the Weakerthans. I think they're from Winnipeg, and you kind of get this feeling of hometown from this album. I think this is one of the crisper indie rock emo albums I've heard. I like that the guitar feels very rich. I think a lot of emo people associate with like, I don't know, screaming and really like intense songs, and this doesn't get very intense. It's kind of on a level even more somber and melancholic at a lot of times. The vocal performance does kind of have that like emo tinge, kind of like, I know the Mountain Goats isn't emo, but like kind of that oh, I don't even know what word there is to describe that, but you know, like, emo vocalists kind of have like a signature style. This guy kind of has that, but in a way that I think is kind of restrained and works really well. My favorite song on this is the title track, Left and Leaving, but also my favorite chords is So Good, and this is a really good album. And finally, an album that is both in the emo category and also great to listen to when you're going back to school, and that is The Meadowlands by Wrens, or The Wrens. I've seen it both ways in places. This is an indie rock Midwest emo album that, again, I think is great for if you are sad on a college campus. The next two albums are going to be about if you're kind of happy on a college campus. This is if you're sad on a college campus. This is the album for you. This is a breakup album that feels very much post-summer. The vocal performance, it's definitely not whispered, but it does feel muted. Like, if I sing softly enough, like, maybe she'll hear me. I don't know, there's just something very, very evocative about the vocal performance in this that I think is kind of unlike anything I've ever heard. Something about the Wrens that I've heard is that they, or he, like, I don't totally know how many people there are like very meticulous about the music they put out. There's not a lot of Wrens put out because apparently this album took like 10 years or something, and it really shows because of how carefully constructed these songs are. My favorite song on this is She Sends Kisses, which has a line about a sophomore at Brown, which as an undergrad at Brown was great for me to listen to that year. And yeah, this is just like, oof, this album really, really hurts, and in like all the best good autumnal ways. But let's say you're going back to school and you want to have a good time. You don't want to be as melancholy as all the other albums on this. Well, I've got two albums for you. And first we have If You're Feeling Sinister by Belle and Sebastian, which is a chamber pop, twee pop album. Belle and Sebastian to me is music for being at a boarding school or at college or something. This is music about being in love. It's very narrative based. You kind of get these like little stories in all of the songs. I wrote down that it's sweatercore, which feels like so like reductive, but I still agree with myself. It's so gentle and so full of life, and yet it still does have like this bittersweet edge. It's certain twee pop is very saccharine and spring and summer, and this does definitively have like an autumnal chill to it that I think makes it perfect for going back to school. My two favorite songs on this are the title track, If You're Feeling Sinister, and then also Get Me Away From Here, I'm Dying, which is exactly what it says. It's a great song for like autumnal angst, and I love it. Then my second album of this category, which is similar in some ways, is Reading, Writing, and Arithmetic by The Sundays. This is a jangle pop and dream pop album. I find this to be one of the warmest albums on this list. It is great for September. In fact, I feel like I might re-listen to it like tomorrow or something, because it's right about that time for me where I'm about to start listening to like my early autumn albums. This is some of the jangliest jangle pop in existence. The guitars just like create these motions and these lines that like just, I don't know, fill you with bliss. And then the vocalist, who I think her name is Harriet Wheeler, her voice is like very warm-toned, very high-pitched. I want to say almost nasally, but in a way that I mean as a compliment and not an insult, because I think that's what helps create this very warm atmosphere. These songs are also about love and about heartbreak and all of that good stuff, just in a very jangly, warm package that I think is amazing for autumn. And my favorite song in this is Here's Where the Story Ends. I think that song has gotten like quite popular. You might have heard that song but just not have heard the whole album, and if that is the case, I really recommend the whole album. And finally, sometimes in autumn it's nighttime. I mean, all the albums I mentioned could be listened to at nighttime, but these three I really associate with autumn nights. Up first, we have On Fire by Galaxie 500. This is a slowcore dream pop album, and this is for sunset. I think the cover of this album makes me think of like a really rich sunset, and the way it sounds makes me think of like just before dusk, the sunset. Like I was mentioning earlier, I think there are kind of different types of dream pop, and this one also is very much not in the sky. This one is very grounded. It's a little noisier than I think you would expect of dream pop. I think it's just generally louder. It's not especially ethereal, and I think that's where kind of the slowcore comes in, because the electric guitar just plays a very big part in this album. This one is another one that I think is great from summer to fall. I think there are some people I know who associate this more with summer, which I can totally understand, because it kind of does have this haziness that is good for kind of like a thick summer, which is why I think it's a great like September album. The vocal performance is very warm, but the songs themselves feel kind of, again, like slow and dense, but also still dreamy and warm. I find this perfect for kind of like taking a walk around the neighborhood and seeing, you know, seeing the leaves change right as the sun is setting, all that. Very orange toned, very dark orange toned. It's really beautiful. This one's also tough to talk about because I feel like this album really hurts. It's kind of an album that begs you to associate it with people, and I do have people I associate this album with, which is a beautiful feeling in life, but also like, just pain, you know? The best song on this, I think, is called Blue Thunder. I think that's like not even contested. It's just one of the best songs of all time, and you really gotta check it out. Next we have an album that I re-listened to recently, and it like completely jumped up in my favor, and that is The Splendour of Fear by Felt. This is a post-punk album that also has some jangle pop elements. If I could say like jangle punk, I guess I would include that. And it is mostly instrumental. There are a couple songs of this, I think there are 6 songs, and a couple of them have some lyrics, but it's mostly to me an instrumental album. This album to me feels like an eternal autumnal dusk. Like just as the sky is beginning to darken, you're like suspended in like that pre-midnight blue. Sky's not quite as dark as it's going to be, but it's still like that dark, rich shade of blue. This album I think is very singular. It's guitar notes. It doesn't do, like, once a song begins, you're kind of in this loop of the song, so I think it kind of creates this like post-punk hypnosis of beauty and wonderment. This album feels very rich to me. It feels like rich jewel tones in a way that for some reason feels just so autumnal to me. It's shades of warmth and of coolness just like perfectly fit November for me. I'm talking in ways that are completely non-musical and just hoping you're gonna understand what I'm saying, but if you need a short song from this album to check out to see if you're gonna be into it, the first song, called Red Indians, is beautiful and perfectly encapsulates that kind of like hypnosis of beauty and delight that I'm talking about. And finally, we have Leaves Turn Inside You by Unwound, which is a post-hardcore indie rock album, and this is for cold autumnal nights and days. Post-hardcore is an album that I'm not sure I can even really describe. If you don't know what that is, it's kind of like, it's not hardcore in the way that it's like hardcore punk or like people screaming, but it's very complex and richly constructed and dark and cold, and like again it also like leans on these indie rock elements. When I think of this album in my head, I just like hear complex guitar licks. There's this one song, October All Over, which is the one I will recommend, that just like, I don't even know, I don't think it's in 4/4. If it is, and like my brain's just like, the memory of it is not in 4/4, but it's like, it's music that kind of like wants to be listened to actively, and I find that very rewarding. This is really an album for late October, November. It's really getting cold, and when you walk outside you need to be wearing a jacket. That is when I would recommend Leaves Turn Inside You. So those are my 15 albums that I recommend for autumn. This video is probably very long. Again, I had like such a big short list, and I do want to shout out a few albums that like just didn't make it. You've got Pink Moon by Nick Drake, Either Or by Elliott Smith, The College Dropout by Kanye West, and Dragging a Dead Deer Up a Hill by Grouper. For various reasons, those albums just didn't quite make the cream of the crop, but I love all those albums and would also recommend them if you like really, you're like, I've listened to all 15, I need more. I've got those for you. So thank you so much for watching, and you will see me in the next one.